Have you ever stopped to wonder what really makes a test great? It's definitely not just about asking tricky questions. There's actually a whole science to it, kind of hidden in the data. And that science can tell you if an assessment is fair, if it's accurate, and if it's even working. Today, we're going to unlock that science. We're talking about psychometric analysis.
Right? So this is the question that keeps every educator up at night, isn't it? You've spent hours writing the questions, you've given the test, but how do you know? How can you be sure it's actually measuring what your students learned? How do you get beyond just a gut feeling and find some real evidence?
Well, the answer, it's something called psychometric analysis. I know, it sounds super technical, but it's really just about listening to what the results are telling you. It's the process of using all that student response data to basically grade the test itself. It helps you make sure it's doing what you think it's doing.
Okay, so to actually do this, you're going to need a toolkit. And that toolkit really comes down to 3 core metrics that help us figure out what's going on inside our assessment. So let's open up that toolkit and break them down one by one.
First up is the p-value, which a lot of people just call the difficulty index. This one is super straightforward. It's just the percentage of students who got a specific question right. So, for instance, if 60 out of 80 of your students nail a question, the p-value is 0.75. Bottom line, high p-value, easy question. Low p-value, tough question. Simple as that.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. This chart shows there's actually an ideal range. See, the goal isn't to make some ridiculously hard test. You want to write informative questions. Ones that are tough enough to mean something, but not so impossible that everyone fails, or so easy they don't tell you a thing.
So when you look at the p-value for every single one of your questions, this is the simple gut check you're doing. Is this question as difficult or as easy as it should be for what I'm trying to measure?
All right, tool number 2 in our toolkit. And honestly, this might be the most powerful one, the Rit value. Think of it as a question's discriminatory power. It's one of the best ways to tell if a question is any good because it measures how well that single question separates the students who get the material from those who are still struggling.
And disimage? It just nails the concept, doesn't it? A really good question, one with a high Rit value, acts like a sieve. The students who did great on the overall test, they should be getting this question right. And the students who bombed the test, they should be getting it wrong. It just sorts them out.
So you're looking for a Rit value of about 0.35 or higher. That's a good question. Anything below 0.15 and you've got a problem. And if you ever see a negative Rit value, whoa, that is a massive red flag. It literally means that the students who did poorly on the test did better on that one question than your top students. Something is seriously broken.
So when it all comes down to it, the Rit value answers one simple question. Does this thing actually do its job of separating different levels of understanding? A question could have a perfect difficulty level, but if it doesn't distinguish between students, it's pretty much useless.
Okay, for our last tool, we zoom out and look at the whole test. This is Cronbach Alpha. It's a measure of reliability, or what we call internal consistency. Think of it this way. If your students took a very similar test tomorrow, would they get a pretty similar score? If the alpha is high, the answer is yes. Your test is stable and consistent.
And here are the benchmarks. You're really shooting for that 0.8 or higher for a solid test. Once you dip below 0.7, things get pretty problematic. It suggests the results are kind of noisy, maybe not that reliable. And sure, you can often boost this number by adding more questions, but that only works if you're adding more good questions.
This is the big final question that Cronbach Alpha helps us answer. Can you actually trust the score from this test as a stable, dependable measure of what a student knows? And with that, our toolkit is complete. We've got the essentials.
Okay, so we've got the tools, now what? Well, now we need the playbook, right? Because collecting all this data is one thing, but knowing what to actually do with it, that's where the magic happens. This is the part where the numbers turn into real decisions.
And this right here, this is so important. This is the key mindset shift. The goal isn't just to get a report card on your test. It's to get a diagnostic guide, a step-by-step plan that tells you exactly how to make it better next time.
All right, let's get practical. Let's talk p-value. If a question's p-value is crazy low, like lower than just random guessing, something's probably broken. First things first, check your answer key. Seriously, is it right? If not, fix it, rerun the numbers. If the key is correct, then the question itself is probably the problem, and you should just ditch it. On the flip side, if the p-value is super high, it's just an easy question. That's usually fine unless your whole test is a cakewalk.
Now, the Rit value. If you see a negative or 0, that's a 5-alarm fire. And what's step 1? Always check the key. If the key is right, then the question is probably misleading. Maybe it has 2 right answers. Either way, it's gotta go. Now, if the RIT value is just kind of low but still positive, it's just a weak question. You might try to reword it, or if it's also super difficult, you probably just want to cut it.
And what if the whole test is shaky? A low Cronbach Alpha. If it drops below 0.6, you simply cannot trust that score for any big decisions, like passing or failing someone. You have to treat the results as just feedback, purely formative. If it's in that middle, borderline zone, you can usually fix it by getting rid of those weak, low-red questions we were just talking about.
And that brings us to the big picture here. Because this isn't about running the numbers once and you're done. It's not about stamping a test good or bad and just moving on. It's really about starting a continuous cycle of improvement. This whole analysis phase, it's the bridge. It's what gets you from the test you just gave to the even better one you're going to give next time. It completely changes assessment from being this final judgment into a living, dynamic process.
So let's boil this all down, shall we? You now have 3 incredibly powerful questions you can ask of any test. For the p-value, you ask, is it the right difficulty? For the RIT value, does it actually distinguish between my students? And for Cronbach Alpha, is this whole test consistent? And please never forget, the real goal here isn't just to measure stuff, it's to improve.
Look, every single time you give a test, that data is telling you a story. It's a story about what your students understood, what confused them, what questions worked, and what questions totally failed. The data has a voice. So the only question left is, now that you have the tools to understand its language, are you ready to listen?